Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance for one of their celebrity lectures. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Welcome everyone, I'm Cindy Maka, the director for the Western Museum of Flight. Our celebrity lecture series has a long history of acquainting our audiences with fascinating and heroic stories from the aerospace world, often presented by the very people who lived those stories. Today's story is no exception to that rule. No exception except, in addition to being a fascinating, heroic story from aviation history, it is also the story of a personal saga of a determined individual who exemplifies the ideals of America as a nation of immigrants. The story of Steve Pisanos is similar to those that we hear from inspirational speakers who offer fictional tales about the young immigrant who comes to this country looking for opportunity, finds it, and by working hard and dedicating himself to becoming an ideal American, makes an honored place for himself among us. The difference here is that Colonel Paesanos' story is true. I have been so impressed with this story that I was tempted to stand here and summarize it for you all. But after all, I have the real thing. So it is my honor to introduce to all of you Colonel Steve Pisanos.
Good morning, ladies, gentlemen. Thank you, Sydney, for the splendid introduction. It is a pleasure indeed to be here, and I'm delighted for the opportunity to speak to you, to tell you my story. And the story begins in a faraway place. When I was growing up in Athens, Greece, and one day while I was on my way to school, I was about 12 years old, a biplane of the Greek Air Force began to do acrobatics. I was alone. I had been late to really join my friends who usually come by my house to pick me up. And I stood right there watching that biplane doing acrobatics. I was not fascinated, but totally captivated. And when the exhibition was over and the airplane flew away, I said to myself, that's it. When I grow up, I'm going to become a military aviator and nothing else. From then on, school and books meant nothing to me. All I wanted was aeroplanes. I began to skip school and walk some 25 kilometers to the aerodrome to watch the aeroplanes fly. I began to lie to my father. On Sunday, we would sit down to have dinner with the family, and my father would ask each one of us, 5 boys and a girl in the family, what did you learn in school last week? And I would say, oh, I had geography, geometry, Greek history, and this and that, all big lies. But when he discovered that I was lying, well, I pay a penalty. He cut my expenses, and he restricted me from going here or there, and that was it. But all along as I was growing up, I was really dreaming that eventually when I finished high school, to get to the Greek Air Force Academy that produced the aviators. Well, that was a wishful thinking because I did not have the ability to take any exams. I knew nothing about those exams, and I decided to forget about the Greek Air Force Academy and start thinking about leaving Greece and go someplace else to learn to fly. That someplace else, it happened to be America. I had learned so much about this wonderful country from the movies, Westerns, and the gangsters from Chicago, Al Capone, and all those. Anyway, this wonderful country was just fascinating to me as I was growing up. And I waited until I passed my 18th birthday to really just try to do something to get to this country. And my first attempt, you wouldn't believe this year, one Sunday my father said, son, go down to the kiosk and get me the Sunday paper. I walked down there, And of course, as I picked up the paper, they think that I was interested were the sports page. But nearby that page, there was an ad. Make your next travel to New York with the Italian luxurious liner Rex, arriving in the port of Piraeus such and such date. When that ocean liner arrived in the port of Piraeus, I was down there watching that beautiful ship. It was departing the following day. So the night before that following day, I invaded my mother's cooking jar and picked up a lot of cookies, filled up my pocket. I took my books and I put them in a box nearby in our yard there. My father had a chicken coop there with some chickens, and I covered the books. And I left the house. I left a note at my home. I'm sorry, father and mother and brothers and sisters, for doing this to you, but I'll be in touch. I took the subway. I didn't have to pay because my father was really working for the subway. He was a driver. I went down to the port of Piraeus, walked down to the pier where the Rex was docked, and I looked at the beautiful ship, and I said, how do I get on board? At one moment, I thought of, if you really recall how they tied those big vessels, on the harbor with the heavy ropes. For a moment, I thought maybe I can try to climb on that there like old Tarzan, Johnny Weissmuller. But I said, wait a minute. I said, do I have the strength, to go all the way? On the other hand, somebody's liable to see me. No, that's not a good way. But anyway, all of a sudden, a truck arrived loaded with trunks and suitcases that belonged to Greek passengers who were going to New York, no doubt. 4 guys jumped down and began to unload the truck that had stopped by the accommodation ladder, and they really had a big pile of goods there, trunks and suitcases, and the truck left, and the 4 people remained there, and they began to carry the goods through the accommodation ladder up to the top deck. My God, I said, on the second round, I said, why don't you pick up 2 suitcases and follow them? That's exactly what I did. I got to the top deck, and the policeman, the harbor policeman they had standing by to check who is coming and who is going, he didn't say anything to me. Immediately I said, I got to find a place to drop this here and then look for a place to hide. As I turned into a passage there to the right, a door opened, slapping my face. The foreman of the 4 guys had really unloaded some suitcases in that room there. And he looked at, immediately, I dropped my suitcases because the door slapped me in the face. And he looked at me, he said, who in the heck are you? What are you doing with the suitcases? I began to tremble and scare like the devil. And I said, my father, from the kiosk down to the entrance of the harbor, he asked me to come up and help you guys. Maybe I can make some tips. A big lie. And I said, no, we don't need you. And he grabbed my hand and took me by the policeman, and I was thrown off the Rex. That's how I miss using the Rex to stow away to America. I stood right there and I said, next time when you are here, I'm going to find a different way to get on board, period. So I didn't give up. About a month later, we were playing soccer after school, and one of my buddies, said, you see that fellow there in red? He had a red top. I said, yeah, he's an American. An American? What is he? He wants to play soccer with us. My God, he was a Greek-American fellow by the name Harry Apostol from Buffalo, New York. Boy, I got so excited when I met that guy, and we became friends. He played soccer with us. We went to the movies. He was visiting his uncle, by the way, an attorney, a friend of my father that used to play cards at the coffee house. Anyway, we went to the movies with Harry, and he told me so many things, and I told Harry what I had attempted to do. He said, you would have never made it, because at night, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, it's so cold, wherever you have found a place to hide, you would have died. But he said, there is another way that we can get to America. Get a job on a merchant ship, and someday, that merchant ship will dock on an American port. And when that happens, you just get away from the port and find your way to New York. the Greek fellows there, restaurants and Greek churches, somebody's going to help you. He said, it might take a year, it might take 6 months, it might take a week or a few days. After I passed my 18th birthday, I got a copy of my birth certificate, and I joined the Greek Merchant Marine, and without telling anything to my father or to my family. So I then, about a month later, through some connections, I had a job on a 10,000-ton freighter as an assistant fireman. What on earth, does the assistant fireman do on board the ship? I had no idea. Finally, I revealed to my father, and of course my father, who was born in Sparta and served in the Greek Navy, he knew about the sea, and he said, oh, that's a good idea, son. You're going to become a man if you're going to really work at sea. Anyway, he gave me his blessing to go, and he gave me $8 American. Where he had found that money, I have no idea. He said, this is American money. You can use them anywhere in the world. Anyway, I reported for duty at the vessel on the 25th of March, 1938, Greek Independence Day. I met the two firemen that I was supposed to be the assistant, and I asked one of them, what does this assistant fireman do on board the ship? Well, he said, let me take you downstairs. He took him down below, and you see, my God, a mountain of black coal from here to way down there. And he said, you see this wheelbarrow and you see this shovel? You shovel coal into the wheelbarrow, you push it down there, and you dump it into the pit for the two firemen, myself and my other fireman. We can feed the furnaces. I looked at the wheelbarrow, a small Volkswagen. I looked at the shovel. I was dreaming of a shovel. It was a monstrosity. Anyway, that was my job down there. The first shift, I want you to know, I was completely dead. I went to my bunk there to sleep, and I wanted to sleep for a week. But slowly, evidently, I became familiar, and my body, accepted the miserable work, and it worked out okay. We left Greece on the 25th of March, 1938, for Oran, Algeria, to pick up a load of iron ore for a place by the name Baltimore. I really had no idea where Baltimore was. As I said, I knew New York and Chicago and Hollywood with cowboys and all that. And then I asked this one of the firemen, I said, where is this Baltimore we're going to? Oh, he said, that's a big city, about 2 hours by train from New York. If there was a happy crew member on board that ship, I was the one. But I never revealed to anybody that I had a dream. We left Oran, crossed the Straits of Gibraltar, we got into the Atlantic, and we ran into a storm. It was so bad that for 24 hours we never really went anywhere. I got seasick, and I began to cry and not forgiving myself what I had really put my body through. Anyway, we went through that storm, and slowly we arrived in Baltimore on a Friday evening. We couldn't really dock inside the harbor because another vessel had occupied the berth. So we anchored outside, and I began to immediately, think, how on earth do I get ashore now? I thought for a moment if I could really secure a plastic bag to put my clothes in and swim ashore, maybe about 100 yards, something like that, ashore. But I gave up on that because I was never a good swimmer. And I said, if I get in trouble, that's it. So all of a sudden, I heard a small I got up early morning, Sunday morning, by the way, and nobody was up except the cook and myself. And I got dressed up. I took my $8 with me. And then I was walking up and down in the middle of the ship there by the galley. And all of a sudden, I heard a small putt-putt boat. I looked over, and I saw an elderly fellow. He docked his little boat at the accommodation ladder. He climbed up, and I noticed he had a bunch of newspapers, under his shoulder. And I thought, newspapers? Probably delivering newspapers to the vessels that were parked outside the harbor. Anyway, he went by me. He went over to the cook at the galley and dropped a paper. Then he dropped another paper at the officer's dining room, and then he began to go down. And I said, my God. Then I leaned over, and I thought, my God, maybe he can take me over. I took $1 out of my pocket, and I whistled at him kind of slowly, and I waved the dollar, me, and he gave him the signal, come down. So I came down, and that's how I really landed on American soil about the middle of April 1938. But where do I go from there? It took me all day to find the railway tracks that would lead me to the station. I finally got to the station, but again, I didn't know where to go or what to do. But I remember one time, one of the firemen, while we were crossing the Atlantic, he told us a story how a few years back he had come to Baltimore with another ship and another crew member who wanted to go to New York and to see his uncle. And he said, well, we got to the station and bought our tickets and got on the train. Beautiful train, you know. He said a couple hours by the train. And I said, wait a minute. Now, how did you buy your tickets, you know, if you don't speak English? You know, if you had money, fine. Oh, he says, you have to have money. You go to the counter and you tell the man, ticket for New York. Do you know how many times I repeated those words while I was traveling call? Maybe 1,000 times to really memorize them. So here I am at the station, and I don't know where to go or what to do, and I saw a man in uniform. And my father, who was really a driver for the subway in Athens, he wore uniform, and I felt that this guy must be with the railway. I went over to him, and I had my dollar, and I said, ticket for New York, and he pointed out the window. That's where I purchased my ticket. I got on the train, arrived in New York. I came out on 34th Street and 8th Avenue at the Pennsylvania station, crying like a baby who had lost his mother at the shopping center. I didn't know where to go, what to do. And I remember I began to walk on the eastern side of 8th Avenue towards 42nd Street. I think I got as far as 42nd Street because I remember later on when I began to go to the movie houses on 42nd Street, all lighted. It was so beautiful that night. And then I decided to go back to the railway station to reorient myself, still, you know, crying. I wanted to ask someone, you know, for help or something, but I didn't know what to say. Then all of a sudden, as I was walking back to the station in darkness, I noticed across the avenue the Greek and the American flag. Oh my God, I said, the Greek flag. There must be some Greeks there. And slowly I tried to cross the avenue. I almost got hit by a car, not knowing anything about traffic, because I remember the guy slammed his brakes on it, and there was big squeaking. Anyway, I got across there. It was a movie house that was playing the first movie ever made in Greece, The Shepherd's Daughter, which I had seen and all the Greeks had seen. Oh my God. I was admiring the black and white pictures, if you remember those days, the old days. And then all of a sudden, two people stopped behind me and began to talk in Greek. One was saying, what do the Greeks know about making movies? Movies are made in Hollywood. You know, the other guy said, let's go in. If we don't like it, we can always walk out. I got so excited, I turned right back, and I said, excuse me, but what is it you want to know about this movie? I saw this movie in Athens. And the elder fellow, who turned out to be brothers, by the way, the other fellow said, you saw this movie in Athens? And what are you doing here? I said, the way you're dressed up looked like you came out from a ship, you know, or something. I said, I did. I said, I left the ship in Baltimore, and I don't want to go back. I want to stay in this. Oh, where are you going to stay? He said, do you have anybody? No, I said, I don't know. Maybe I can find a Greek church, you know. And no, he says, the Greek church can help you. He says, this is my brother. He said, we live in Brooklyn. You come with us. And that's how I was saved from my miserable journey to America. They were so wonderful. And this guy, about 3-4 days later, he took me to an employment agency on 6th Avenue that was managed by a Greek fellow. And this employment agency was for individuals, for dishwashers, for restaurants or hotel or bakery, something like that. And my God, he got me a job at a bakery on 147th Street and Broadway as an assistant doing things. That was my first job in America. I lived in Brooklyn for about 2-3 weeks because at the bakery, the place had also a restaurant and a soda fountain and a bar. I met a Greek waiter there, and he said, "You live in Brooklyn with your..." I didn't tell him how I had come to America. I told him that I was, another lie, I was living with my uncle. He said, "You live in Brooklyn?" He said, "I live just 2 blocks away from here, and in my apartment I have an extra room for $3 a week." He said, "Why don't you..." My God, that's what I did. Anyway, that was my first job in America. My first objective was to learn English. I had taken French in high school in Athens, but you didn't speak French here, you spoke English, so I had to learn English. I wanted to go to a night school, but my working hours were from 8 in the morning until 8 at night. So I got hold of a Greek-English dictionary, and I began to learn English through that method. Later on, I discovered a night school, and I attended that for a few weeks. And about 7-8 months later, I had learned enough English, and I began to take flying lessons at Floyd Bennett Field. The Greek fellow in the bakery, not in the bakery, in the soda fountain, Jimmy, I told him that I love airplanes. "Oh," he says, "I know the Brooklyn airport, Floyd Bennett Field Airport in the Brooklyn, we can go there." So, my God, he took me down there one time, and we located the flying school. Joe Agliata was the owner of the flying school. It was really an aero club. You had to pay $20 to join the aero club, then you paid $12 to fly with an instructor and $8 for solo. Anyway, I started to fly. I was the happiest guy on earth. And I wanted to scream so bad. One day I said, after I had solo, by the way, I said, "I'm going to scream so strong, and I hope the waves, will take my voice, and take them to Greece for my friends, to see that I had been able to do what I wanted to do." Anyway, I solo at Floyd Bennett Field, but then a Greek fellow I had met in Manhattan, he said, "You pay $12 for an hour of flying with the instructor?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "There is an airport in New Jersey, Westfield Airport. They have a school there, and you pay $8 with the instructor and $6 for solo." A week later, I went to that agency, employment agency, and I got a job at the Park Hotel in Plainfield, New Jersey. And that's where I continue my flying. I got my private pilot's license. But then one day, my job at the hotel, by the way, was a pantry boy. I was in a pantry preparing the coffee, the salads, and dishing out the desserts and what have you for the waiters and waitresses. Then one day, I thought the world was really going to fall down for me. A gentleman walked into the kitchen and was talking to the chef, and the chef pointed at me. And that gentleman came over. He said, "Are you Spiro Pisanos?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I'm from the immigration, and you must come with me." "Come with you? Where?" He said, "Ellis Island." He said, "You came to Baltimore," he said, "and that was wrong. Anyone who comes to this country comes through Ellis Island from Europe." So anyway, I said, "Can I go to my room to put my street clothes on?" "Yes," he said, "but I must come with you. But I want to warn you, don't you pull anything because I am armed." So the man came into my room, I changed, and we caught the train a few blocks away from the hotel. He didn't say anything until we arrived at Jersey City and we caught the ferry boat to Ellis Island. He says, "I don't know what the director is going to do with you. The Germans have invaded your country, and I don't think they can send you back. So we'll see." I spent one night at Ellis Island, and the following day, one of the officers there in uniform, he was going, there were many, many people there, and he was going around and hollering, "Pisanos, Pisanos," and I raised my hand. "Follow me," he said. He took me to the director's office, and who was inside that office? The owner of the Park Hotel, a German fellow, who had come to this country the same way I did. And now he owned that Park Hotel. He was a waiter on the SS Bremen. And after his third journey, if I'm not mistaken, he decided, to heck with the sea, I want to stay in this country. Anyway, he met his wife. She had some money, and that's how they bought the hotel. Anyway, he was in the office of the director of Ellis Island. Evidently, when he found out from the chef what had happened, he came over. He drove all the way to Jersey City, took the ferry to Ellis Island, and the guy tried to rescue me. I didn't know that. Anyway, here I am, face the director of Ellis Island, and he said to me, young man, we cannot send you back in your place of birth. The Germans have occupied Greece. And here is this paper. He said, you carry that with you. You're authorized to work anywhere you want to. But this gentleman wants you back at this hotel he owns or something. And that was it. I felt like, going around his desk and grab that man and kiss that son of a bug 5 times. But, I hesitated a little bit. Anyway, I thanked the man so much, and as I was walking out, Mr. Stender, of course, thanked the guy too. And as we were walking out the door, he says, young man, he said, I had really made a statement there why I had come to this country, that I had learned to fly, and that I had acquired a private pilot's license. And he said, young man, good luck with your flying. Anyway, so the war in Europe began in 1939. After the Battle of Britain, at the end of 1940, the RAF had lost so many pilots, and they came to this country to recruit civilian qualified pilots without any publicity. The only guy who was objecting to that problem was J. Edgar Hoover. He made statements that we cannot allow the American boys to volunteer for the Royal Air Force, period. But evidently either Winston Churchill or somebody from England got in touch with FDR. And they say that FDR told J. Edgar Hoover to look the other way and allow the American boys to join the RAF. And that's how we got away. But I also had a problem. When my instructor told me where to go, they had an office at the Waldorf Astoria on the 13th floor. On my day off, I took my logbook and my license, and I went visited that office, and I met Squadron Leader George Graves. Truthfully, I only had 170 hours flying time, but the requirement was 200 hours. When this gentleman looked at my logbook, he says, but you don't have 200 hours. And I was just about, to really kill myself, for not being qualified to join. And I said to the man, maybe I can go back and fly some more and be back in 2-3 weeks. No. He says, he called his secretary, and he said, help Mr. Pisanos to complete the application. We completed the application, and he told me that they'll let me know later on. About a month later, I got a call from New York. In the dining room we had within the kitchen, for the dining room, small dining room for the help, there was a public telephone. And that's the telephone number I had given Squadron Leader George Graves. He called me up and he said, Mr. Pisanos, I wish to inform you that you have been accepted to join the Royal Air Force. I was the happiest guy in that kitchen. And then for a moment, then I said, now, wait a minute now. I got a big problem. How do I tell a German who was my boss, a German from Hamburg, Germany, that I'm going to leave the hotel and that I was going to Europe to fight Germany? So I had to do it. I had to, for about a day or so, honest to God, I was going up and down. I didn't know how to approach this problem. So one day I decided to really go to his office. I knocked the door and I said, Mr. Stender? He said, oh, Steve. He said, come in. And by the name Steve, my Greek name was Spiro. But the chef in the kitchen, when I first met him, he looked at me and he said, God darn it, he said, long time ago I worked for a Greek fellow. You should look like him. His name was Steve. And from then on, he began to call me Steve. That's how that name stuck with me. But later on, when I was at the Pentagon, I changed that officially, and it's really on my official papers. Anyway, so now here I am now. How do I tell Mr. Stender? So I said, here I am in his office. He said, Mr. Stender, I said, I probably have to leave. He says, why? He says, I gave you 2 pay raises. Do you want another pay raise? Truthfully, I was working like a slave in there. When I went on my day off, the chef had to put the dishwasher and the busboy to do my job. I had worked up a system, tic-tac-toe. I knew exactly what to do. I had prepared at least, the first thing in the morning, coffee, open clams and oysters, for lunch and this and that. And anyway, so then he said, don't I pay you? No, Mr. Stender. I said, I have joined the Royal Air Force and I'm going to England and I'm going to fight Germany. I said, I thought the sky was going to fall. He got up. That man got up. He came around and he hugged me like he was my father. And he said, Steve, I want you to go there and give heck to that doggone Hitler and his pals. They have ruined Germany. He says, I never supported him. I never liked him. And he said, my God, honestly, I felt, you have no idea how I felt in my heart. And I want you to know, while I was overseas, every month I would get packages from the Park Hotel with cookies and goodies and everything. And they told me when I left, after they had a big celebration, with the chief of police was there, the mayor was there, and God knows other politicians, when they gave me a send away. Anyway, I left there, and when I joined the Royal Air Force, they sent me to California at Grand Central Air Terminal to attend Polaris Flight Academy to learn how to fly really the military way. I spent about 3.5 months there, and I got about 90 hours on military aircraft, and it felt wonderful. Then upon graduation, of course, thank God I was graduated as a pilot officer, equivalent to a second lieutenant, whereas some of my classmates, 15 of us in a class, some of my 7 classmates were appointed as sergeant pilots, the other 8 as pilot officers. Anyway, we left the country through Canada, arrived in England, and in England I had to go through an officers training school and an operational training unit. What you learn in the operational training unit is how to dogfight, how to strafe locomotives or targets on the ground. And I finished the officers training school, and then after that I went to the operational training unit. It was really wonderful. I began to fly the Hurricane, and then later on the Spitfire. And the aim of the instructors we had there, one of my instructors, by the way, was a Battle of Britain ace with 13 victories. And he was really showing me the tricks of dogfighting, strafing a locomotive. And the British, really believe that when you strafe a target on the ground, you don't pull up like that to get away. And whereas the replacements we got from America later on, when we were doing strafing, that's what they were doing, and they were dead. So the RAF believed that after you strafe a locomotive, you just drop down and you fly below treetop level at 400 miles an hour to get away. The gunners, can't see you. And that's how I think during my tour with the RAF and the 4th Fighter Group, I must have strafed 6 locomotives. And every time I did that, I dropped down below treetop levels. But you had to be careful, high tension wires and everything else. Anyway, then after I graduated from the operational training unit, I was assigned to a squadron, 268 fighter squadron that were flying P-51 Mustang A's with the Allison engine, low level, not high altitude. But I had a problem after I had flown about 7 missions over Holland, strafing locomotives and other targets. One day I received a call from a wing commander, Kinatos, a Greek representative who had an office in London that represented the exiled Greek Air Force. When Germany invaded Greece, many of the pilots escaped from Greece. Some of them went to Cyprus, some to North Africa, some to Malta, and some to England. But the exiled government in London, they had difficulties to locate those guys. They wanted to really locate the escaped Greek pilots to send them to Egypt because they were trying to form a Spitfire squadron, Greek Air Force Spitfire squadron with Greek pilots. And the only way was to go to the Air Ministry and pick up a roster of active RAF pilots and look for the Greek names. That's how they got me. Anyway, I went to London and I faced a gentleman in uniform. I was in uniform. I saluted when I walked into his office. He said, "Mr. Pisanos," he said, "I'm going to take you away from the RAF and send you to Egypt to join this squadron that we're trying to form." I said, "Sir, I don't want to go to Egypt. I want to stay with the RAF here. If I survive, I want to go back to America and become an American." I said, "That's why." Well, he said, "You are a Greek subject and we need you." I said, "I know you need me, but I don't want to go to Egypt." And honestly, I walked away from his office without even saluting. I didn't want to have anything to do. And so I was really fearful that they're liable to pull a shenanigan and go to the Air Ministry and say, "This guy is a Greek subject and we want you to release him." So I had met Chesley Peterson, who was the commander of 71 Eagle Squadron. I had met him at the American Club one day, and I thought for a moment, why don't I go to see if, Peterson can help me? I went to the American Eagle Club in London on Charing Cross Road, and the lady up there, an American lady, by the way, who had volunteered to do work in England, I said, "Mrs. Dexter," I said, "how can I find Chesley Peterson?" "My lads," he said, "Chesley's here in London, and he has left a telephone number. Oh, you want to talk to him?" I said, "Yes, it's very important." My God, she called Peterson. I talked to Peterson. I said, "Sir, I got to see you. It's very, very important." "Okay," he said, "lunch at the Regent Palace Hotel," a hotel we used to patronize. So I met Peterson. I told him what the Greek Air Force was trying to do to me. "Well, first of all," he said, "do you want to go to Egypt?" I said, "No, sir, I don't want to go to Egypt." "Okay, that's it. I'm going to Fighter Command, and I'm going to really take care of it." So he went to Fighter Command. He was telling me later on. But the Fighter Command was kind of hesitant to really, try to intervene. They felt if the Greeks want this guy, let them have it. But Peterson says, "Now, wait a minute. You spend more than $50,000 to train this guy as a fighter pilot. Now you are to release this guy to go to Egypt at a squadron does not exist. Does that make sense?" And finally, this guy at Fighter Command, he said, "Pete," he said, "I think you're right. Let's get Pisanos out of this 268 squadron to 71 Eagle Squadron. And if the Greeks want him, they have to go to Peterson." That's exactly what happened. They told me immediately, "Pick up your things and go to Depton and report to 71 Eagle Squadron." Anyway, they never really called. That's how I got to the 71 Eagle Squadron. But then I was faced with another problem. When America came to war and began to send, after Pearl Harbor, and began to send General Spaatz, Doolittle, and Kepner, and all those to England, their aim was to take all the Americans from the 3 Eagle Squadrons, 250 guys, all PhD diplomas, in the air fighting. As you can see, the Air Force, the Army Air Force at the time, they wanted to have us. So anyway, it was officially that everybody had to go to the U.S. Army Air Corps at the time. And they had to go through an interview in London and a physical. And that was it. So I told Peterson, I said, "That doesn't apply." He said, "Look, General Spaatz told me that they want every one of us, and that includes you. So you better go to London, get your physical, get your interview." And anyway, I went to London and I faced 3 Army Air Corps colonels in a special office in a building next to the American Embassy. Everyone had to go through that interview. So I went in, I saluted, and these 3 full colonels, they spotted my accent. He said, "What nationality are you?" I said, "Greek." And of course, Greece was at war with Germany at the time. And they had a little chit-chat. And, oh my God, I said, "That's it. They're not going to take me." And then the man in the middle, Colonel Henry Stovall, I remember his name, he said, "Young man, Well, I told him that my dream was that if I survived the war, to go back to America and become an American. So the man in the middle, he said, young man, will you accept a commission as a second lieutenant in the Army Air Force? I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a dream. I said, yes, sir. That's how I got into the Army Air Force without being an American citizen. Anyway, now, May the 3rd, 1943, we, by the way, when we transferred over, we kept our Spitfires. We were doing the same thing as we were doing with the RAF. Then later on, we got the P-47s, and our Peterson, and then this fellow, Don Blexley, the greatest aerial commander in Europe, was Don Blexley, and I'll say some more about him later. They wanted to really get a fighter where we can get slowly into Berlin and hit Hitler and his pals in the German capital. Anyway, so then we got the P-47s later on, and on the 3rd of May, I was playing with my roommate, Don Gentili, with the 2 new P-47s. We were dogfighting over the sea about 30,000 feet, and the tower called me up, Pecton 39, that was my call sign. You are to return to base and pancake immediately. Pancake in RAF terminology is land. Anyway, immediately, you know what went through my mind? The Greeks have gone to the authorities and probably to the American embassy and say, you guys are wrong to take this man into the Army Air Force. He is a Greek subject and we want him. So anyway, I told my friend Gentili, I said, Don, I got to go. He said, okay, see you later. So I dove down and I landed, and there was Peterson and my squadron commander in a staff car by the parking spot where I put my P-47. I asked the crew chief, I said, what? Oh, he said, they've been here for some time, waiting evidently for you. So I dropped down from the aircraft and I went over and I saluted. My squadron commander came off the front seat there, and Peterson says, get in the car. Oh my God, I said, that's it. The Greeks have really done it. So, and he's going to, so we went to his office and he said, sit down. And he grabbed the phone. Colonel Peterson, he said, connect me with the embassy. Oh my God, I said, the embassy, probably somebody at the embassy will tell me that you're not welcome in the Air Force. He said, Peterson here, will you connect me with the ambassador's office? John Wynant was the ambassador. He was, with Pete, they were good friends. And the phone, evidently, Pete says, John, I got the lieutenant right here, and I think you better tell him. You know what through my mind? Oh my God, I said, here I am. They're going to kick me out, period. So here I am. He gave me the telephone, shaking like the devil. Yes, me talking to an ambassador. I said, yes, Mr. Ambassador. Yeah. Lieutenant, how would you like to become an American citizen here in London today? I think my heart really left me and said, I'll wait for you outside. But I said, but sir, I was going to wait to get back. No. He says, a special emissary has come from Washington to naturalize 6 of you boys, and you're going to be the first one. So Peterson now lighted his pipe, and he was smiling like no one's business, So after, he says, you better get down to London, immediately, because the special representative will come to my office any moment here, and the ceremony is going to be a big one. So anyway, after he talked to Peterson a little bit, and we hung up, he said, surprise? I wanted to surprise you, that's all. Anyway, I got on my uniform, got the train, London, directly to the embassy, ambassador's office, and I met the gentleman, Dr. Henry Stovall, was the gentleman from the Department of Justice who had specially appointed to naturalize 6 of us that were serving in the U.S. Air Force at the time who were not Americans. Anyway, we had a little time, and he said at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the ceremony will take place here, and then Mr. Hazard decided to go and have some coffee before 2 o'clock. And we did. At 2 o'clock, I walked into a place, you wouldn't believe this here, about 5 or 7 times the number of people we have here had occupied that place. Walter Cronkite was there, Andy Rooney was there, and so Ed Morrow. They were sitting up in the front. Anyway, so the ceremony started, and this is what Dr. Hazard told them. Gentlemen, I want you to witness the naturalization process here. For the first time in American history, naturalizing an individual outside the U.S. continental limits. And that's what happened. The celebration was absolutely superb. I shook hands with many, many people. An English newspaper guy, came to me and he said, "Hey, Lieutenant, how do you feel now that you have become a Yank in British soil?" I said, "Terrific. More pay." I said, that what I was making in the RAF as a pilot officer, I was making $85. In the Air Corps, $320. I was a millionaire. Anyway, here we are now, dogfighting and escorting the bombers. They really, the 8th Air Force decided to pick up the 4th Fighter Group and specialize them for escort into Germany. I took part on the first escort into Germany. I took part on the first escort to Berlin on the 3rd of March, 1944. And dogfighting with Luftwaffe. And it's interesting. Years later, I was in Paris at Le Bourget, at the air show there, and I met Adolphe Galland, the chief fighter boss of the Luftwaffe. We had a real reunion with the guy. He couldn't believe, we met inside the Bell helicopter chalet. A Greek Air Force general had invited me to join him in Paris. Anyway, so I sat next to Adolphe Galland, and he looked at me. I had civilian clothes, of course. He said, "You helicopter pilot?" I said, "No, General, I don't like helicopters. I fly good airplanes." "What airplanes do you fly?" What airplanes do you fly now? Oh, I said, "I don't fly now, but in the war I flew Spitfire." You flew Spitfires? I think his chair must have gone 5 inches above the ground. I said, yes, sir, I flew. I said, "General, I was with the 4th Fighter Group." And I said, "I was on the first escort mission to Berlin on the 3rd of March, 1944. And we came over," I said, "and if you remember, the weather was bad over the target, and the bombers did not drop their bombs. They aborted the mission outside the outskirts of Berlin." He says, "I was meeting with the Marshal, and when we were told that the Americans have arrived over Berlin with their bombers, escorted by fighters, the first time, escorted by fighters, I told the Marshal, we are kaput." This is what he told Marshal Goring. Anyway, it turned out to be the truth, because later on the Mustang, like sitting out here, capitulated the Luftwaffe. Anyway, I did strafing, dogfighting. One of the not, I would say, worst dogfighting. I was flying a P-47, and we got into a mix-up east of Frankfurt, I think, and I jumped on a ME-109, and this guy, evidently, he was dancing all over the sky. I was trying to get him on my gun sight and fire one, but kept on moving all over and descending at the same time until we arrived on the deck. And what this gentleman had in mind, I noticed that we were approaching high tension wires. I saw the towers. What this gentleman did, he went onto the wires, and he felt that I would go straight through. When I spotted the towers there, then it dawned on me what he was trying to do to me. So I pulled up my P-47, barely missing the top cable. I dropped down on the other side, flying straight, about maybe 100 feet above the ground. I opened up right there, and I blasted the heck out of him. Anyway, that was really one of the, I would say, most miserable experience I have had. And thank God I survived all this fighting until the 5th of March, 1944. We had converted to Mustangs at the time because we were able to go to Berlin on the 3rd of March. The 4th of March, back to Berlin again. But as I took off, one of my drop tanks came off, and I was out of the mission. I could never really get to Berlin and back. Evidently, the mechanics didn't really, that's what they said, somebody did not type the tank properly. Anyway, so on the 5th of March, escort mission to Bordeaux, B-24s, that they were going to bomb 2 aerodromes the Germans were using with Ju-88s, that they would take off from those aerodromes, come out in the Atlantic, and bomb the convoys that brought the goods to England from Canada and the US. Anyway, we got to Bordeaux. Half of our squadron came back. They couldn't make it to the target. The reason was that when we got the first shipment of Mustang Bs, they did not really bring any spark plugs with the aircraft. The aircraft arrived with any spark plugs on the engine. So then the generals wanted to put the aircraft up in the air. They began to use Spitfire plugs. On the first Berlin mission, 4 P-51Bs, they had engine failure. So anyway, over Bordeaux, we got into a dogfight. I shot down 2, and I chased 2 more. When I hit them, the first one dropped into the clouds, and I lost the guy. Then his friend evidently was behind me, but I managed, to make some turns, and I got on his tail. I fired at him, and he began to smoke, and he did the same thing. And I was just alone. I decided to come home. I climbed up to about 22,000 feet, and it was just about south of Le Mans. Le Mans was here, Le Havre was here. I was going to go to Le Mans and then Le Havre and then cross the channel. Over Le Mans, my engine began to act funny. The RAF Spitfire plugs were good for about 7, 8, maybe 9 hours. Then the boys had to change them. Well, on that mission, I think I down to Bordeaux and by Le Mans, I had about possibly close to 6 hours or maybe 5.5 hours or so. We had external tanks, of course. And my engine began to really squawk and yawn and moan. And oh my God, I really said, this is it. The plugs, no doubt. I changed the mixture. I changed the RPM, nothing doing. So then I was approaching Le Havre, and I was at 22,000 feet, just about over Le Havre, bang, the engine quit. I declare an emergency, Mayday, and the controller from England says, aircraft on Mayday, give us a long transmission. I repeated, Mayday, Mayday, Pecton 39, this and that, but they couldn't help me. I had a dead engine and I couldn't really make it. Then all of a sudden, bang, I lost my radio. Now, as I was just coming over Le Havre, the guys opened up their ACAC, and honest to God, I said, they bound to shoot the heck out of me with a dead engine. So I decided to turn right back and bail out somewhere further down. That's what I did. I decided to, and then those days, they used to tell us, intelligence, do not bail out in high altitude, because the Germans had a habit, of shooting guys coming down in a parachute. And the warning was, wait until about 3,000, 4,000 feet and jump. Anyway, I waited about 2,000 feet, and I released my canopy and buckled everything. And as I tried to step out to the wing, I had forgotten to connect the cord from the Mae West from the dinghy to my Mae West. In case, you go in the channel, you bail out over the channel, the moment your feet hit the ground, hit the water, you turn a buckle here. We had RAF parachutes, not the American, where you had to connect here and here. You turn the buckle here, pop that, there goes the parachute, but the cord will pull the dinghy out of the parachute, and you had a little boat there to survive. I had forgotten to connect that. And that thing was, when dogfighting over Bordeaux, evidently must have gotten stuck somewhere underneath the seat. Anyway, I had difficulties, and finally, after I loosened the thing up, and I was outside the wing, I realized that I was too low to leave the aircraft. So I stood right there, and I crash-landed barely. And thank God, as I was coming over a barn, I reached inside, and I pulled the stick slowly. And my God, I killed some of the flying speed I had. And as I went over the other side of the barn, The right wing hit the ground first. The aircraft went a little bit to the right, and I was throwing, barely missing the stop propeller. How I survived, I have no idea. I thought of putting fire on the aircraft and get away from there. I took my scarf off, an old piece of parachute the boys had given me. I dipped it in one of the fuel tanks. I began to take the matches out of my escape kit because I never smoked and I never carry matches with me. And as I was really doing that process, I heard firing. I looked down there, and my God, 2 German soldiers were coming after me. Oh my God, I said, they're trying to scare me. I tried to light again, and the bullets began to come over my head. And they hit the vertical stabilizer of my 51. Oh my God, I said, they're after me. I dropped everything and I began to walk into a forest nearby. And it was there where they came in the forest. They began to talk in German. What they were saying, I had no idea. Probably, you better give up. We're going to kill you. Anyway, I had attended an escape lecture one time from an RAF pilot who escaped from a prison camp in Germany. He escaped. He walked all the way through Germany, through Holland, Belgium, France, down to Spain. And he came back to England. And he was the guy giving the lectures, you know. And I remember he always said, get into a forest. That's where you can get away from the enemy. Anyway, I got into the forest, and everything was quiet, and I don't know whether I made a circle, a triangle, or a rectangle. I came out the same way I had gone in, and I could see my aircraft. I got away from there. I jumped a fence. I walked on a paved road around the bend. The motorcycle, this 2 gentlemen had arrived. I thought, later on, you know, when I saw that great escape with old Steve McQueen, how he stole the motorcycle, but I didn't know how to drive it. But even if I did, where would I go? You know, they would have really captured me. Anyway, so I jumped on another fence there, and for 5 days, by the way, I had a miserable left shoulder. It was so painful. Later on, the French doctor, of the underground doctor, it was dislocated. And he and another man helped, and they fixed my shoulder. Anyway, for 5 days, I wandered all over the French countryside, drinking water from running creeks, from eating dandelions and whatever I can find on the ground. And the 5th day, I made contact with a young fellow, and he looked at me and he said, "Vous avez anglais?" I said, "No, American." He took me to his house, and then in the evening, he took me to a coffee shop where I met the real underground guys. The people decided that, now remember, I went down the 5th of March, 3 months before the invasion. The decision was that, period. All the pilots from London, all the pilots, down pilots, British and Americans, have to be gathered at central locations. You know, we were scattered all over France, and, you know, with the invasion, the people, you know, would have had difficulties, you know, try to locate this guy here, this guy here. So the instructions was locate them at central locations. I remember when I was in Paris later on, they moved me to Paris, by the way, and I spent 6 months in Paris. And I lived in 16 different families, underground families. And my God, I remember, you know, that the last house that they moved me in, just about I would say, the latter part of May, before June 6th invasion. We were 32 Americans inside in a big farmhouse. And it was there where I learned that we had to be gathered together. Anyway, the invasion took place. The liberation of Paris took place. I was there during the liberation. And my God, you should have seen the Germans. They were so humiliated, you know, leaving Paris. They were stealing everything. They even stole automobiles that the French people had hidden in barns that had taken the rubber out of the wheel. They stole, I saw with my eyes, a convertible automobile loaded with wounded soldiers in the back, with the driver up in the front, without rubber wheels, only the goddamn rims. And it was making so much noise, you know, on the cobblestone there. And it was awful. Anyway, Paris was liberated, of course, and then many of us, about 800, came out from hiding. We got back to England, and that was the end of me No more combat, because I knew too much with the resistance. So I was sent to Wright Field. And at Wright Field, I met quite a few guys. Chuck Yeager joined up later on, Bob Hoover, Gabreski, Dick Bong. Giantelli was, of course, there, and that's why I think they sent me, because Don Giantelli and I were roommates in the RAF and then in the Army Air Force after we transferred. Anyway, I went through test pilot school at Wright Field, and I spent more than a year there. I flew all the German fighters we had there. I flew the Me-109, the FW-190, the Me-262, and the Zero. And we did testing. I was selected with Giantelli and 2 other pilots to do the testing on the YP-80 at Murak Lake. We got over 100 hours of test time. And then it was at Wright Field, I had an incident with a P-63, blew up at me over Cincinnati at 35,000 feet, and I was able to put the aircraft back. And I always had in mind that the instructors at the test pilot school, always emphasize, if you can, bring the aircraft back so we can find out what happened. If you bail out and the aircraft crashes, we have lost everything. Anyway, I brought the aircraft back. What happened, the Allison engine had incorporated water injection, and I was to do the testing with that. That's where I ran into problems. Anyway, after that incident, I left the Air Force and I went to fly for TWA. And I went to Kansas City. And it was there where I met my wonderful wife. I got married to in 1946, and I lost her last year after 66 years. Anyway, I didn't like the airline game. I spent 2.5 years with TWA, but then I came back on active duty. And Giantelli was at the Pentagon, by the way. And at that time, to get back on active duty, you had to have 2-year college. I didn't have any college. My God, they took me because I had jet time. At that time, you can really count the jet pilots in your hands. I completed 30 years in the Air Force. And I would volunteer from Germany. I had overseas tours in Naples with NATO, Germany with headquarters USAFE. And then I volunteered from Germany to go to Vietnam. I spent a tour in Vietnam. And although I volunteered to go as a fighter, but I ended up as an airlift squadron pilot. Later on, I took command of the squadron, and I flew 375 missions supporting the Army Special Forces in the jungle of Vietnam. That was my job. Anyway, but they gave me command of the squadron later on, and they promoted me to colonel. After I left Vietnam, I was lieutenant colonel in Kansas City, and my God, I got a telegram from Washington, says, your assignment to Vandenberg has been canceled. You have been promoted to colonel, and you are now assigned as deputy commander at the 308 Ballistic Missiles Wing at Little Rock. From there, I had the assignment to Athens, Greece, as chief of another telephone call. This guy from the Pentagon said, Pisanos, how would you like to go to Athens as chief of the Air Force mission? My God, I did. And it was just unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Anyway, let me close here and tell you something that after the Athens assignment, I am really proud of the success I found in America. And it was really great to also become a U.S. citizen. What America did for me, I have always treasured in my heart, as there is so much to be grateful for. The opportunity to really fulfill my boyhood dream and arrive at the rank that I did in the U.S. Air Force. It's just unbelievable, the successes that one can really achieve in this wonderful country. And America, my friends, is the greatest democracy on this planet. It is a country that believes and practices freedom, opportunity, equality, and promise. A country worth loving, serving, fighting for, and dying for Uncle Sam and the American flag. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About here at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance. I'm Betty Wheaton. I'll see you next time.